Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture a room.
Okay.
And it's not just any room. It's, one of those rooms with the mahogany paneling, thick cigar smoke hanging in the air, heavy velvet drapes.
Right, I'm with you. A classic power room.
Exactly. And in that room, you're sitting with some of the smartest, most influential people in the world at that time.
Hmm.
We're talking about the people who shape policy, who decide how the whole economy works.
Ones who decide who gets funded and maybe more importantly, who gets ignored.
The movers and shakers, the people holding all the keys to the kingdom.
Hmm.
And they are all there to discuss a problem, a huge problem, one that feels like it's about to just swallow their entire society whole. And that problem is poverty.
It's the perennial problem, isn't it? It's the one that every civilization, every single one eventually has to face. From ancient Rome to modern day New York, the question is always the same. What do we do about the people who've been left behind?
Right. But here's the twist. And this is really why we're doing this deep dive today. In this room, these men, and believe me, they are all men, they aren't trying to figure out how to lift people out of poverty.
No, they aren't brainstorming job programs or, education initiatives or housing subsidies.
None of that. They're not talking about redistribution or charity or anything like that.
No.
The serious economic theory being proposed in that room, the one that's getting the nodding approval from the intelligentsia, the best practice solution on the table, is to simply let the poor starve.
And look, we should be really clear about this right from the get-go, because I know how that sounds.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about some mustache-twirling villain in a movie. This isn't a fringe conspiracy theory or some manifesto you'd find on the dark web.
No, not at all. This was a foundational idea in economic history. We're talking about a perspective that genuinely shaped how society views wealth and, more importantly, how it views the people who don't have it.
It's an incredibly disturbing proposition, to put it mildly. But if you want to understand the modern world, if you really want to get why we fight about welfare or healthcare or foreign aid in the specific ways we do right now, you just have to understand this moment in time.
So today on the Deep Dive, we are unpacking money, power, and starving the poor. We're looking at sources that analyze ideas from capital in the 21st century, but also historical analyses of the late 18th century, and we're going to stare directly into the logic of a man named Thomas Malthus.
Malthus is absolutely the key here. He's the pivot point. Before Malthus, you could say poverty was seen as a tragedy or maybe a failure of Christian charity. But after Malthus, it became something else entirely, something logical.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack that logic. We're going to try and understand the fear that drove his theories, the terror that drove the elites to accept them. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. We're going to identify where that specific line of thinking is still hiding in our conversations today.
Because, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert, it hasn't gone away.
Not by a long shot.
No, it hasn't just vanished into the history books.
It's
It's changed its vocabulary. But the core logic, that is still very much alive and kicking.
Okay, so let's get into it. We need to set the stage. We aren't in the 21st century anymore. We need to do a bit of mental time travel. So where are we going?
We need to go back to Britain in the late 1700s. To be specific, let's say the 1790s. And you really have to understand this is a world that looks and feels profoundly different from ours.
Right. The source material paints a pretty stark picture. This isn't the Bridgerton version of England, with the tea parties and the pristine lawns and witty banter in the drawing room.
Oh, not at all. Well, maybe it is for a tiny fraction of people.
For the Duke of Hastings, maybe?
Right, for the 1%. But for everyone else, for the vast, vast majority of the population, life is a daily struggle on caloric survival.
Just to stay alive.
Yeah. And the source highlights a really crucial statistic to ground us here. Somewhere between 75 and 80% of the entire population lived on farms.
That's a staggering number. I mean, it's hard to even imagine. Basically, almost everyone you know is working the land.
Exactly. We're talking about a fundamentally agrarian society. And the thing about agrarian societies in this specific era is that they are incredibly fragile. You don't have global supply chains. You don't have, refrigerated trucks bringing strawberries from Spain in the middle of December.
You eat what you grow. Period.
And if you don't grow it,
you don't eat.
You don't eat. You are constantly one bad harvest away from total disaster. Just one wet summer, one early frost, one little blight on the crops, and the entire system just collapses.
And the source points out that this fragility was colliding head-on with something else. The population was rising. fast. So you have this incredibly delicate food supply, and suddenly you have a whole lot more mouths to feed.
That is the perfect recipe for panic, and that's a word I really want to emphasize here. This wasn't just some abstract math problem for the intellectuals of the time. It was a visceral, gut-level panic.
Why panic, though? I mean, don't we usually think more people means a stronger economy, more workers, more growth?
In an industrial economy, maybe, but not in an agrarian one that can't scale up its food production to match. Think about it. The economists of the day, they were looking at their charts, or, whatever the 18th century equivalent of an Excel spreadsheet was.
Scrawls on parchment.
Right, and they were seeing a train wreck coming. The question that was keeping them up at night was, how in the world are we going to feed all of these people?
It feels like that scene in a disaster movie where the lone scientist is pointing at the data and yelling that the asteroid is going to hit and nobody's listening.
It's a bit like that, yes. But their reaction to seeing the asteroid wasn't, let's build a planetary shield. It wasn't, let's innovate and figure out how to grow more food. Their reaction was, well, it was much, much darker. It was, the lifeboat is only so big, and some of us need to survive, so...
So the others have to go.
Precisely.
Let's talk about that power dynamic, because the source really hammers this point home. You've got this landscape of scarcity, food is tight, but you also have this massive, gaping inequality.
That's the other crucial ingredient. There were vastly more poor people than rich people. That's just the nature of the pyramid, right? You have this tiny, tiny sliver of aristocracy and gentry at the top and a massive base of peasantry at the bottom. But when resources start getting scarce, that pyramid starts to look very, very unstable to the people who are standing on the peak.
And the source uses this specific phrase, that the wealthy elite were terrified of losing everything.
I mean, try to put yourself in their shoes for a second, the psychology of that. If you're a wealthy landowner in the late 1700s, you're looking out from your manor window at a literal sea of people who are hungry, who are desperate, and who outnumber you maybe 1,000 to 1.
And it's not just an internal fear. There's a very real-world example happening right then.
Oh, absolutely. You have to remember what was happening just across the English Channel.
The French Revolution?
Exactly. The heads of the French aristocracy were literally rolling. The poor had risen up, they had overthrown their monarchy, and the guillotine was working overtime. The British elite were watching this happen in real time, and they were sweating. They were absolutely petrified.
That's a very scary place to be.
It's a profound existential dread. They feared that if that balance tipped, if they gave up too much, or if the poor suddenly realized their own collective strength, the elite would lose their power. They'd lose their status. They'd lose their entire world.
So this whole economic anxiety, it wasn't really about the economy in that abstract way we talk about it, like GDP or inflation rates.
Not at all.
It was about survival of the status quo.
Exactly. It was about raw self-preservation. And when human beings get into a state of self-preservation, they are capable of rationalizing almost anything. They needed a story. They desperately needed a logic that justified their position, their wealth, their inaction.
Which brings us to our main character. Enter Thomas Malthus.
The man of the hour, Thomas Malthus. He's often called the father of demography, but in this specific context, he's more like the architect of a very specific, very cold kind of cruelty.
So paint the picture for us. Who was this guy?
He was a parson, an academic, a scholar. He's the kind of guy who sits in a quiet study, surrounded by books, looks at columns of numbers, and thinks he's cracked the secret code to human misery.
And the source describes him looking at this world of 80% farmers, a booming population, fragile food security, and he comes to this one singular conclusion. And that conclusion was?
There isn't enough to go around, so the poor must be the problem. It's a classic case of identifying a symptom and mistaking it for the disease. Or, maybe more accurately, blaming the victims of the disease. Malthus looked at the scarcity and said, in essence, the reason we have scarcity is because there are too many of them.
Them. That is the key word there, isn't it? That us versus them mentality.
It is absolutely fundamental to his entire logic. And in the minds of the wealthy elite, Malthus was a genius. Not because his math was necessarily perfect. I mean, history has shown us that Malthus was spectacularly wrong about a lot of things, especially food production.
He didn't see the Industrial Revolution coming.
Not at all. He didn't foresee tractors or chemical fertilizers or any of it. But at the time, to them, his math looked solid. It looked irrefutable. And more importantly, it validated their deepest fears. He gave them a scientific-sounding reason to feel the way they already felt.
Okay, so let's walk through that logic, because it wasn't just him saying, I don't like poor people. It was dressed up as a mathematical argument.
Oh, absolutely. It's the famous Malthusian trap. He argued that population, when unchecked, grows geometrically. So, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, it doubles.
It's an exponential curve shooting upward.
Right, but food production. He believed that only grows arithmetically. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can only clear so many new fields. You can only add so many more farmhands. It's a straight line that goes up slowly.
So you have a curve that's rocketing up, that's the people, and a straight line that's just plodding along, that's the food.
And inevitably, the curve crashes into the line. That point of intersection is mass starvation. It's famine. And Malthus argued that this wasn't a policy failure, it wasn't a moral failure, it was a law of nature, like gravity.
He was basically telling them exactly what they wanted to hear. It's not your fault you're rich and they're starving. It's just nature.
Exactly. He provided the intellectual cover for their greed, and his solution flowing from that logic, it was brutal. It wasn't just do nothing. It was actively stop doing the little you were already doing.
The source puts it so bluntly. His solution was cut off all support to the poor. Stop all aid. Completely.
No welfare,
Yeah.
no parish relief, which was the system at the time, nothing.
And the phrase he used, or at least the concept he relied on, was let nature take its course.
Which is such a sanitized, academic, almost clinical way of saying something just horrific.
Right. It sounds so passive and harmless.
Yeah.
Oh, just let nature do its thing. Like you're watching a David Attenborough documentary about gazelles on the savannah. But what does that actually mean in practice?
In practice,
Yeah.
it means watching a family starve to death in a hovel down the road and doing absolutely nothing because you've convinced yourself that their death is necessary to balance the great equation.
It's treating their death as a natural corrective mechanism.
Yes, like a forest fire, clearing out the dead wood so new trees can grow. It's a chillingly detached perspective.
That is.
Yeah.
That is chilling.
It is. But you have to understand, to Malthus and his many, many followers, this was responsible economics. They argued that if you fed the poor, if you gave them aid, they would just have more children.
That was his argument, right? That they lacked moral restraint.
Precisely. He believed the poor were constitutionally incapable of controlling their impulses. So if you gave them a loaf of bread, they'd just use that extra energy to make more babies, and then you'd have even more poor people to feed down the line, and eventually the whole system would collapse under the weight.
So in their twisted logic, letting people starve to death now was actually the kind thing to do for the long-term future of the species.
It's a kind of monstrous utilitarianism. It is logically consistent, I suppose, if you accept the initial premise. But the premise itself is just monstrous.
And that monster is built on a foundation of dehumanization. You can't hold this kind of view if you see the poor as fully human, as equal to yourself.
You can't. Which brings us to this really powerful metaphor the source uses to explain that worldview. It talks about the chessboard.
Yes, this is crucial for visualizing how the elite saw the poor. The source describes the poor as pawns on a chessboard.
Okay, let's really unpack that, because I think this explains the utility aspect of their thinking perfectly. Think about how a grandmaster uses a pawn in a game of chess. A pawn is useful, isn't it? You need them to control the center of the board, to block attacks, to protect your more valuable pieces, maybe even get promoted to a queen later on. They have a function.
Right. You need someone to till the fields. You need someone to claim the manor house. You need someone to fight the wars. The whole society literally runs on their labor.
Exactly. When the poor are laboring, when they're serving the elite, they are useful pawns. They're allowed to stay on the board. But what happens to a pawn in a chess game?
They get sacrificed all the time without a second thought.
They are totally and utterly dispensable. If sacrificing a pawn saves your king or your queen, you don't hesitate. You don't mourn the pawn. You just take it off the board and you keep playing the game.
So the view was, we need the poor to work for us, but if there are too many of them, if they become surplus to our needs, or if they aren't working, or if resources are tight,
sweep them off the board. That's it. That is the dehumanization that is necessary to justify the policy. You cannot look another human being in the eye, see them as a person with the same rights and feelings and hopes as you, and then say, you need to starve for the good of the economy. You can only do that if you see them as a pawn, a unit, a number on a ledger.
it effectively splits the poor into two distinct categories, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The useful and the useless.
Exactly right. And that distinction becomes the entire foundation of public policy. If you're useful, we tolerate you. We might even give you just enough to survive. But if you're useless, you're a drag on the system. And Malthus argues we have no social or moral obligation to keep you alive.
And the source makes a really critical point here. It says this whole thing, this Malthusian logic, the starvation policy, the chessboard mentality, it wasn't really about the economy.
No, not at its core.
It was about fear of losing control.
That is the single biggest takeaway from the historical analysis. Malthus provided the justification, he provided the science, but the real driver was fear. The rich needed a reason not to share. They needed a reason to hoard their wealth while people were dying right outside their gates.
Because if they admitted that they could help, but just chose not to.
Then they're the villains of the story. They're morally bankrupt. They are Scrooge before the ghosts show up for Christmas. But if Malthus comes along and tells them, no, helping them actually makes the problem worse. You are doing the right thing by hoarding your wealth. Well, that's a powerful, powerful drug.
It moralizes their self-preservation.
It turns their greed into a civic virtue.
It's amazing how much work the human brain will do to avoid feeling guilty.
It's the ultimate cognitive dissonance hack.
Yeah.
And it worked. I mean, it profoundly shaped policy for generations. The Victorian workhouses, the way the Irish potato famine was handled by the British government, it all has Malthus's fingerprints all over it.
The workhouses are such a perfect example. The source touches on them. The idea wasn't just to help people. It was to make the experience of receiving help so miserable that people wouldn't want it.
It was called the principle of less eligibility. The condition of the pauper receiving relief must, by definition, be worse than the condition of the lowest paid independent laborer.
They made the workhouses look and feel like prisons on purpose.
Absolutely. Families were separated, the food was just gruel, the work was pointless and degrading. It was all designed to be a deterrent.
Because they feared that if charity was too nice, the pawns would stop working. They'd get lazy.
Exactly. If you make the safety net too comfortable, the fear of starvation disappears. And if that fear disappears, well, how do you get people to do the back-breaking, dirty, dangerous work for pennies a day?
You lose control of the chessboard.
You lose control.
So, okay. We have this dark chapter in history. Late 1700s. Panic. Malthus says, let them starve. The rich say, phew, thanks for the excuse. And then we move on. Right? We're enlightened now. We don't think like that anymore. We have human rights. We have democracy.
Well,
I know. I was setting you up for that one.
you were, because the source is very, very clear on this point. It uses the phrase, you can't unsee it.
That's the quote. This isn't just old history.
No, it really, really isn't. The specific policy of let's literally starve the poor to death might be off the table in polite conversation, mostly.
Obviously.
But the logic, the underlying architecture of the argument, it is baked into the very foundations of modern discourse.
Okay, let's land this plane in modern life, because I think a lot of listeners might be thinking, come on, nobody's seriously saying we should let people die. But the source argues that we are still using the exact same arguments, just with different words.
Well, think about the phrases we hear every single day when the topic of welfare comes up, or homelessness, or universal basic income. What are the common rebuttals you always hear?
The first one is always, we can't afford it.
Right. Scarcity.
Yeah.
It's pure Malthus. There isn't enough to go around. Even though we live in a world of unprecedented, unimaginable abundance, I mean, we throw away more food than Malthus could have ever conceived of existing in the first place.
But we still talk as if we're in a famine.
We talk like it's a zero-sum game. If we give something to them, then we must lose something.
Okay, what about the other big argument? If we give them money, they'll just stop working. Or, if we help, we'll just create a culture of dependency.
That one is pure, uncut Malthus. If we help, we'll only make things worse. That is a direct echo, almost word for word, of the argument that aid is counterproductive because it just encourages bad behavior.
It's that idea that hardship is a necessary motivator. That if we make being poor too comfortable, nobody will ever want to be rich. So we have to keep the threat of poverty alive to keep the pawns moving on the board.
And it relies on the exact same dim, cynical view of human nature that Malthus had. He didn't think the poor had moral restraint. We don't use that exact phrase anymore, but we say they lack grit or drive or personal responsibility. It's the same idea in a new suit.
And that ties right back to the chessboard. We are still judging the poor based on their utility to us. I mean, think about the distinction we constantly make between the deserving poor and the undeserving poor.
Oh, that's a huge one. The working poor versus the so-called welfare queens.
Right. Let's break that down for a second.
If you're working 3 jobs just to make ends meet and you're still struggling, you're a useful pawn. You're serving the economy. You're delivering our packages. You're cooking our food. You're cleaning our offices.
We might have some sympathy for you. We might even call you an essential worker.
We might. But if you're unemployed, if you're disabled, if you're struggling with addiction, if you aren't producing tangible value for the system,
Then you're dispensable. Then you are the problem. You're the surplus population.
the language is softer now, of course. We talk about creating incentives and means testing and work requirements, but the underlying premise is identical, that your value as a human being is inextricably tied to your economic output. And if that output is zero, then society's obligation to you is, well, it's also zero.
That's heavy. When you put it that way, you really can see this unbroken line stretching from 1798 all the way to today.
It connects directly. I mean, look at how we design our social programs. We often make it incredibly difficult to get help. The mountains of paperwork, the endless appointments, the constant scrutiny and suspicion, it's the modern version of making the workhouse unappealing. It's designed to discourage people from even asking.
Because deep down, there's this lingering fear that if we make it too easy, the whole system will collapse. Everyone will just stop working.
And I think that brings us back to that core motivator we talked about earlier.
Fear.
Fear. The source argued that the 1700s policy was driven by the rich fearing a loss of power. Has that really changed?
I don't think so, no.
When people today argue so vehemently against social safety nets, when they fight tooth and nail against taxing the ultra-wealthy to fund services for the poor, is it really just about economic efficiency? Is it just a good faith disagreement about policy? Or is there still that whisper of fear?
The fear that if we make the bottom too secure, the top might start to wobble.
The fear of losing control. The feel that if the pawns don't need the kings and queens to survive then, why do we need kings and queens at all?
Whoa. Okay, that puts a whole new spin on it. It's not just about money then. It's about preserving the hierarchy itself.
It's always about hierarchy. Malthus was, at his core, defending a hierarchy. He believed that inequality wasn't a problem to be solved. He believed it was divinely ordained and necessary for civilization to function.
And the arguments we use today,
About deservingness, about affordability, about incentives, they serve the exact same function. They maintain the structure. They make the pyramid seem natural and inevitable. A structure where a few people have a lot and a lot of people have very little, and we're told to just accept that as the natural order of things.
nature taking its course.
Exactly. We've just replaced the word nature with the word market, but it's the same God we're praying to. We say the market demands efficiency. In the same way Malthus said, nature demands balance.
And in both cases, the result is that the people at the bottom get crushed, and the people at the top get to feel like they were just following the rules of the game.
It absolves us of choice. If it's just the market, it's not our fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just how things are.
That is a lot to process. It really makes you rethink every single news segment you watch about the economy.
It should. That's the whole point of digging into history like this. It's not just about names and dates. It's a mirror.
So to sum this up, we've gone from the genuine panic of the 1700s, the mud and the hunger, all the way to the cold, detached calculation of Thomas Malthus, who looked at human beings and saw numbers to be crunched.
We've seen how he gave the elite a moral license to turn their backs on suffering, how he successfully turned a human tragedy into a simple math problem.
And we've landed on the really unsettling realization that we are, in many ways, still using his playbook. We're still deploying his logic to justify why we can't or won't help people today.
We are still, fundamentally, treating people like pawns on a chessboard. And as long as we value people only for their economic utility, we are living in Malthus's world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought, a question to carry with you the next time you scroll through a comment section or watch a political debate or even just hear someone complaining about handouts.
The source material really leads us to this conclusion, and it is a provocative one. It's something you have to sit with.
When you hear someone arguing against a social safety net, when you hear them say, we just can't afford to help everyone, ask yourself this one question.
Are you listening to hard, cold, objective economic facts?
Yeah.
Is it really, truly, factually true that a society as wealthy as ours can't do it?
Or are you just hearing the echoes? The echoes of a group of wealthy, frightened men from over 200 years ago who were terrified of losing their spot at the top of the hierarchy.
Are you hearing reason, or are you just hearing fear dressed up as math?
That's the question. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.